Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, history has shown us that our high hopes on Iran are misplaced and are always met with empty promises. The U.S. should only deal with Iran from a position of strength, and Iran senses weakness in our current approach. Iran is using the North Korea playbook until it realizes its ultimate objective. It took years for us to get sanctions in place that were strong and effective enough to bring Iran to the negotiation table. And now that the moment is upon us, we cannot falter. We must stay strong on sanctions. Yet at the first sign of this fairy tale progress, we balked. We offered Iran sanctions relief just for the opportunity to give them more time to complete its nuclear ambitions without any true enforcement mechanisms. And Dr. Call, you state that escalating sanctions now could weaken international pressure on Iran, and that doing so would tie the hands of our diplomats. But if Iran came to the negotiation table because the impact that the sanctions are having on its economy, wouldn't continuing to pressure Iran bring it to the point where it would be forced to decide between total collapse of its economy or completion of its nuclear program? And I'll continue. The impact sanctions have had on Iran are obvious, but imagine how much more effective they could have been if we in the United States fully and forcefully implemented and enforced them 100% of the time with no waivers. That is not happening now. Ms. Pletka, you testified that you believe that Congress has not done its due diligence and that we have not forced the administration to enforce existing laws. I could not agree more with you. For over 10 years, administration after administration, I have been trying to remove waiver authority, have introduced and passed several sanctions bills, and constantly pushing for stronger and more comprehensive sanctions so that the true intent and impact of these laws can be felt. Do you believe that the lack of enforcement has weakened our hands at the negotiations and undermined sanctions? And finally, Mr. Dubowitz, you argue that core sanctions should remain in place but favor unfreezing certain Iranian assets. Wouldn't injecting funds into Iran's economy embolden the regime and alleviate the pressure, thus eliminating the only reason why it came to the negotiation table? We'll start with any of you. Ms. Pletka.
A lot of questions. Thank you, Congressman Ros-Lehtinen. You asked me about enforcement. What has always struck me about this problem, I came to the Hill in 1992, and we were working on the Iran-Iraq Non-Proliferation Act when I came. Sanctions are always a lagging indicator of the seriousness of the Iranian nuclear program, and that's the real problem. The closer they get, the more serious we are, but it is triggered by them, not by us. And I believe that the President has had the tools in his hand. I believe Bill Clinton had the tools in his hands in 1992 to begin to do the right thing. I think successive presidents have had additional tools in their hands and substantial pressure with the legislation. The problem really is that they've never wanted to enforce, and they've never wanted to lean, particularly on our allies. Colin is absolutely right. They didn't want that pressure. But what we see now at this 11th hour is that those sanctions made a difference. And the problem is that new ones will make a bigger difference.
Thank you.
Yeah. So the problem right now is that we've had a policy of all options are on the table. And now the President of the United States is taking all of those options off the table. He's taking the military option off because of the debacle in Syria, and because nobody, including Ali Khamenei, believes that the U.S. President will use military force to blow up his nuclear facilities. He's now asking the U.S. Congress to take sanctions off the table. So no military force, no sanctions, rely on diplomacy. Well, diplomacy without military threat and without sanctions is not coercive diplomacy. It's trust me diplomacy. And this is a regime that we cannot trust. By the way, this is a regime that has blinked many times in the past in response to significant U.S. pressure. The notion that this regime doesn't cry uncle is just not supported by the facts. Third is the idea of sanctions relief. If you're going to give sanctions relief, first thing you should do is take away all of Iran's money. They have over $80 billion in foreign exchange reserves. Quite a bit of that is accessible. Lock it all down through financial sanctions. Once you've locked it down, only then, if they take steps to verifiably dismantle their military nuclear program, should you begin to release some money. But don't give it back to Ali Khamenei and
So there's still
Rouhani.
so much that we can do.
Well, the fact of the matter is, don't give it back to the regime. Take it out of Chinese escrow accounts, put it in German escrow accounts where the Iranians
Sorry,
like to go
Dr.
shopping,
I'm out of time.
and at the end of the day, snap it back when they cheat.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.